We're here today with three women at the forefront of the campaign that led to the recent historic adoption of a resolution to establish a new United Nations gender entity. We're joined by Charlotte Bunch from the Center for Women's Global Leadership, based at Rutgers University, Bani Dugal, the principal representative of the Baha'i international community at the United Nations, and Rachel Harris from the Women's Environment and Development Organization, also known as WEDO. Welcome, and thank you so much for being with us today. But first, for our viewers, a few words about this campaign. Issues pertaining to women's and girls' rights and their empowerment have in this century come to the forefront of global discourse. This recent growth in visibility and a call for greater coherence among UN entities led to the start of a vigorous campaign. Over the last 4 years, the Gender Equality Architecture Reform Campaign, also known as the GEAR campaign, mobilized representatives from civil society. These representatives, primarily from NGOs focused on women's rights and gender equality, tirelessly supported and lobbied for the passing of a resolution that would create a unified entity. This entity will consolidate the efforts, the functions, mandates, and assets of the following 4 United Nations agencies: the United Nations Development Fund for Women, the Division for the Advancement of Women, the International Research and Training Institute for the Advancement of Women, and the Office of the Special Advisor on Gender Issues. On July 2nd, 2010, the GEAR campaign celebrated the birth of this new entity with the formal adoption of the United Nations resolution to establish UN Women. Welcome, Charlotte, Bani, and Rachel. We'll go ahead and ask Charlotte the first question here. Can you tell us how this campaign came to be?
Yes, the campaign really started out of the World Summit in 2005, which was the same time as the Beijing Plus 10 review. And we as women were trying to get more about the institutions of what would happen in the UN with women into the UN reform that was being discussed then. And we didn't really do anything that year, but we kept talking amongst us about why is there not more conversation in UN reform about women. And then in early 2006, Kofi Annan appointed a panel called the Coherence Panel on Humanitarian Development and Environment. And this was to review what the UN would do in the UN reforms, what now is called the One UN, at the country level. And there were only 3 women on the panel out of 15 members. And so we began a protest at the Commission on the Status of Women meeting in March of 2006. And at that time, WEDO, the Women's Environment and Development Organization, CWGL, my organization, the Center for Women's Global Leadership, and the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILF, co-sponsored linkage caucus sessions, and then later we began a petition to ask for more women on the panel, and then we decided to ask that the panel take up the issue of gender equality. So the GEAR campaign really grew out of this desire that we had that UN reform would look at why the UN doesn't deliver better and do a better job of working on women's issues. And over the following 4 years, that evolved into a campaign with over 300 organizations and the campaign that we know today. But that's where it came from.
Thank you very much. Now, Bani and Rachel, including Charlotte, your work on the campaign has been phenomenal. You've been really at the forefront of it all. And I'd like to go to Bani and ask, how did you get involved with the GEAR campaign?
Thank you. Well, at the time that Charlotte has mentioned, during the CSW in 2005 and 2006, I was the chair of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women. And working together with the organizations that were represented here at the CSW, urging for more representation of NGOs in the UN process, but also for this vision of coherence and having a stronger entity for women. And at the time, we didn't quite conceive of it as this one entity, but we had heard about this coherence panel, and I was at the event that Charlotte mentioned, the Linkage Caucus, which was coordinated by these other 3 organizations, and out of that came a sign-on campaign. And there were eventually more than 500 organizations that signed on. And we actually were invited by Kofi Annan later that year because we had written him a letter asking that he have the coherence panel look at the issues of gender equality at the UN and the fragmentation. So we had this meeting with Mr. Annan, and thereafter we started meeting on a regular basis on monitoring and advocating for a coherent entity at the UN. We also traveled to Geneva at the invitation of the coherence panel to testify on why we thought there needed some reform in the area of the gender architecture. So it was a process that started slowly. We didn't think we would end up here right away, but quite soon after we started consulting and meeting together, it seemed very obvious that we needed a new entity at the UN that consolidated the 4 existing ones, because that was the only thing that made sense at the time.
And I would just add one thing, because you mentioned the coherence panel had a special hearing on gender in Geneva in 2006, and that was a direct result of the lobbying that women had done for this, because it was not on their agenda to begin with. And it really began a process of our being consulted as civil society all the way through this process. And it was the panel where we presented this idea of one entity, and that was the result of our conversations among civil society, and we did a paper to describe what that could be, which in many ways still lays out a lot of the ideas of what we now have.
Wonderful. So you've both been involved from the very inception of it all. Now, Rachel, how did you get involved with the GEAR campaign, and what does your involvement, what has it meant to you?
Well, WEDO has been involved with the GEAR campaign from the very beginning, and I actually came on earlier this year. And my involvement really in the campaign has been to see it through to where we are now, to the new entity, and it's really become more of an inspiration in the work that I do generally at WEDO, but also just understanding how issues evolve at the UN and how civil society, just people, coming together, united civil society organizations can really make a difference in policy and political arenas, and actually push enough so that within 5 years, which can be a long time when you're in the process of it, but it's a pretty short time to get this enormous achievement. It's pretty inspiring, and keeps me motivated in terms of what I want to do with my career, and with how I would like to influence and work with others to influence policies in the future.
Wonderful.